Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Simon from Scar Illustration, and I hope you're keeping well. Today I'm going to talk about how to overcome art block over a time-lapse of my painting, The Calling. Let's dive in. After a busy few months of commissions, I decided to take a little bit of time out to create a personal painting. There were a few reasons why I decided to do this. The first was to recharge creatively. The second reason was to try out some new things without having to worry about clients or deadlines. And the third reason was for self-promotion. In the past, I would have skipped this entirely, as I would have felt guilty about not working on commissioned work. But now I see this as a very important aspect of career development. Because when I'm creating work for a client, they expect to see something similar to what's already in my portfolio, which is of course why they've hired me in the first place. So there's no room to start experimenting with new techniques or styles. But in order to grow as an artist, I believe that trying out new things is crucial to artistic development. I spent a fair amount of time working on the thumbnails for this painting. For some reason, I couldn't seem to quite nail down an idea that I was happy with. Eventually, I came up with these ideas. From there, I set about creating some color sketches. And once again, I had trouble really zeroing in on the right way forward. As you can see, I went through quite a number of ideas before I chose the final sketch. Once that was done, it was time to gather all the reference, as well as take my own reference shots, which, oddly enough, was the smoothest part of this whole process. There are some paintings that I've created that just flowed easily and seemed to almost paint themselves. And then there are those that are an uphill struggle from start to finish. Unfortunately, this painting turned out to be one of those. After I'd finished the line work, it was time to finally get started on the painting. I quickly blocked in all the areas and then set about tackling the background first. For some parts of the painting, such as the mountains, I imported the color sketch and painted directly over it. Sometimes this makes more sense as I've already worked out a loose design for that element rather than trying to reinvent the wheel on the final painting. And then moved on to the most challenging aspect, the main figure. I've never painted a character with 4 arms before, and so I spent a bit of time researching how other artists have depicted similar characters. I toyed with the idea of having the second set of arms underneath the first set, but I quickly ruled that out and decided to have the second set behind, as I thought it was more aesthetically pleasing. For the character's outfit, I looked at a lot of different real-world styles of ceremonial dress, armor, and weaponry, and eventually went with a mix of several different styles. As the character was face on, I ended up using the symmetry tool a fair amount so that I could paint each side as accurately as possible. After some basic rendering of the character's anatomy, I started on her outfit. And here's where I began to run into problems. As I was painting the outfit, I kept on thinking how some of the different elements weren't really working together. But I couldn't seem to decide how to move forward. And so began my art block on the final painting. I've been here before a few times and knew from experience that I wouldn't be able to move forward on this area. Rather than stew on it, I went back to developing the character's anatomy a bit more, so as to give myself some time to think about the outfit. After that, I went back to the outfit and decided to keep developing the ideas for my color sketch, despite my misgivings. Once the outfit was roughed in, I went ahead and started on the weapons. For the swords, I decided to try out some random patterns to see how they would look. I wasn't totally loving the first pass on the swords, so I decided to move back onto the armor, specifically the pauldrons. I liked the way they looked on the color sketch, but for some reason they weren't really working on the final painting. I think for me they just didn't seem to be practical or what the character would actually wear. I ignored my gut feelings on this, which was a mistake, and carried on trying to develop them a bit more. Then I moved on to the spear. As you can see, I changed the top of the spear to something that looked more menacing and in keeping with the character. And then it was back for another pass on the swords. I still wasn't that happy with the way they looked, so I decided to try some new ideas. The second idea was kind of a mix of medieval and Asian styles, which I think was an improvement, but still not quite right. Again, I decided to not waste time obsessing over it and moved on to the foreground rock. I wanted these rocks to look rough and blocky, which I think I managed to achieve fairly quickly. Then it was on to the wizard character. This character also came together pretty fast, as it was based on a creative sketch that I painted some time ago. While I was finishing the wizard, it occurred to me that the color of the skin of the main character was too close to the armor, and so I decided to then change it to something with a bit more color so as to stand out. I briefly toyed with the idea of giving the character a glowing look to the skin, but quickly decided against it. But I did change her eye color from blue to a glowing orange, as I felt it worked better. Then I moved on to adding some reflected light to her face, accentuating her hair and developing her tail. After that, it was time to tackle her belt buckle. The horn skull element wasn't really working with the rest of the outfit, and so after I looked at some more reference, I came up with another idea. The new design still had horns, but I felt it was more suitable for this character, and it seemed to fit better with the outfit as a whole. I then duplicated the buckle, positioned them on either side of her hips, and added some chains to connect them. Once that was done, I decided to try out some wrapped cloth for the waist area. As I was more or less happy with how this was developing, I then moved on to the background mountains. I wanted to convey more depth in the painting overall, and so I started to develop the mist and clouds at the base of the mountains. And I forgot to turn on the camera, so that's why there's a bit of a jump in the development of this area. Finally, I went back to the character with a view to changing the pauldrons. Once again, I had to look at some more reference before tackling this aspect of the character. I created a new layer and reduced the character's opacity, so as to make it a bit easier to start sketching ideas on top of it. Unlike before, I didn't try to overthink things. Instead, I just went for it. Consequently, the new design worked much better, and I ended up using some of the old design underneath the new one. Then I went ahead and started to clean up and develop the rest of the armor. After that, it was on to fixing the swords. Once again, I created a new layer and started working on top of the previous design, which included the carved areas near the hilt of the sword. Up until this point in the painting, there'd been a few times where I'd consider restarting the whole thing, or going back to the drawing board completely. I'd lost confidence in the main idea, and it kind of felt like I was wasting my time. But I decided to take the pressure off of myself, and I started to treat the painting more like a sketch, and that's when things started to finally come together. Moving back onto our outfit, I changed up the breastplate to something a bit more interesting, although still subtle. I also repainted the pants that she was wearing up to this point, as they weren't really working with the rest of the outfit. Having the character with no pants didn't really seem to work either, so I tried a higher rise on the pants, but eventually removed them entirely and ended up reshaping the centerpiece of cloth. Then it was on to developing the clouds directly in front of the character. There seemed to be too much of a disconnect between the main character and the wizard, and so I reduced the space between the two, which I think tightened up the overall image. I still wasn't super sold on the skin tone of the main character, and so I started trying some different colorings. In the end, I just lightened the skin and decreased some of the overall contrast to suggest depth. The spear was looking a little too plain, and so I decided to add some ceremonial ribbons to the top of it. The fire ring above the main character also seemed to be a bit disconnected, so I added flash points on either side, which did the trick. After that, I fixed up some of the background elements, added the suggestion of some distant mountains, and then tidied up some of the details on the wizard. Then it was time to add the usual reflected lights and brush strokes. As you've seen, this painting was anything but easy, and I really struggled to keep going at various times throughout the process. Many times in the past, I would get stuck on a particular aspect of a painting, obsess over it, and then spent a lot of time trying to spot fix the problem, only to find that later on in the painting process that area only really needed a few simple changes to make it work in the grand scheme of the illustration. These days, once I get stuck on one particular area, I just simply move on to something else, to give my brain some time and space to problem solve in the background. As well as that, once I decided to treat the painting as a sketch, I took a lot of the self-imposed pressure off, and everything became a lot easier, more enjoyable, and I was able to get into the zone, which of course translated into the painting. Hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Please consider liking this video and subscribe to my channel. Have a good one, and keep on painting.